So we're going to focus on our background fabric now. And these are the base stitches that we're going to be putting on. So this is going to be like, picture the greens of our pumpkin patch. I am using the Clover water soluble pencil. If you have, I'm using a darker green fabric, so that's why I'm choosing a white pencil. Another thing that I can recommend is the Clover white marking pen, which comes off with either heat or water. I really like this too, but I think with this stitch, I'm going to be fine just using this pencil. So we're going to start by just drawing 2 or 3 squares. And these do not need to be perfectly square. Probably better if they're a little off. And I'm just going to be scattering them. And you know what? If you want to do a rectangle instead, that's totally fine too. So you know what? Let's see. I think I'm going to actually start with just 2 squares. So get your 2 squares on the fabric, and then we're going to start the stitch. So I'm going to show you the woven filling stitch. And to do this stitch, I like to use a tapestry thread. Because it is a woven stitch, it's mostly all worked on top of the fabric, and you're weaving your thread, your needle in and out of your threads. And so it does help to, I have a little knot here. It does help to have a tapestry needle because it has a not so sharp edge. It's kind of a blunt tip to it. So it doesn't catch on your threads as much and makes it a little bit easier to stitch this. Doesn't figure I get a knot right as I'm pulling out my thread. Okay, so the thread that I'm using, this is by DMC. If you have a Michaels nearby, you know that I've just recently found this thread at Michaels in person, and I'm very excited about it. It can also be found on DMC's website. Hang on, I just need to get this so that I can actually cut my thread while I'm chatting with you. On DMC's website, it is listed as Cotton Redders Mat, and I'm probably slaughtering the name of it, but that's what it is. At Michaels, it's listed as Satin Moss. So it's a non-divisible thread, which means it's not like your typical 6-strand embroidery floss. This is meant to be used just as you get it off of the skein. It's a thicker thread. You can see I have it here next to a size 3 pearl cotton. And when you look at them side by side, they're right about the same thickness. So I say that it's comparable to a size 3 pearl cotton. So I have a variety of greens that I'm going to be working with, but we're going to start with this one. And we need to first get down our foundation stitches. So thread your needle, and I'm going to work my stitches vertically on this, in this square area. Now remember, this doesn't need to be perfectly square because we are going to be covering this up. This is our base for our pumpkin patch. And so it doesn't need to be perfect because we're going to be layering lots on top of this. But I do like to, as I'm stitching, I kind of line up where my next stitch is going to be, just so that I know I'm keeping these stitches close together. And I'm making mine a little bit uneven, like the beginning and the end of the row, just because I don't want it to look like I came and stitched on a square to this fabric. So I'm going to keep doing this. Okay, so I have my vertical rows here, and I need to tie off my thread before I work the horizontal rows. So the way that you tie off your thread, I'm going to go to the back of the hoop, and I am just going to thread my needle and thread back through the last few stitches, just like this. And then you can tie a little knot. With this stitch, I do like to tie a little knot because I'm going to be weaving these stitches and I don't want this to come undone. and then you're just gonna trim your thread. So now I'm gonna use another color green so that you can see as I'm stitching, it'll be easier for you to see the difference in the stitches. And I'm cutting a generous amount because I don't want to be replacing my thread as I stitch. Now I know it is wasteful of my thread, but I always start in the middle of this area. I find that when I'm able to start in the middle, I can get my stitches to line up nicer. And I just hold my thread there so I know where I'm aiming for. So because this is a woven stitch, we are just taking our needle and thread and we're gonna go just pick, either go over or under the first one, and then whatever you do next will be the opposite of that. So I'm gonna go over this, under, over, under, over, under, over, all the way until I get to the other end. And then I'm just gonna pull my thread through. Now you can adjust your thread. You see that I'm not pulling it where I need it to be. It needs to be up here. So I just need to get it to the other side. And then you can just tidy up your rows. Once you get a few of these rows done, it's gonna just line up a lot nicer. So the first few rows are kind of like your test rows. They're your placeholders to make sure that everything starts lining up then. So I have my middle line. Now all of my other lines, I'm gonna start going up here and then I'm gonna work down. And so I'm gonna bring my needle up. You can make these lines as close to, oops, or like you can decide how much space you want. I could have made these rows a lot closer, but I'm okay seeing this green fabric behind these stitches. So now I'm gonna bring my needle up and I'm doing the opposite of what I just did. So because this thread is going under this foundation stitch, I'm gonna start by going over. And so this is a good way to just check that you're weaving this right. You just wanna make sure that the stitch next to it is the opposite of what you're doing now. And if it isn't, you'll be able to figure that out soon enough because your rows aren't gonna look woven. They're gonna look the same as your previous row. So I pull my thread all the way through. I'm gonna line it up and it's on top of the fabric, so you can push it around. If you want your rows to have a wavy line to them, you can choose to do that. They don't have to be perfectly straight. This is a field or a garden that we're kind of mimicking, so that would not be perfectly straight. So give yourself a little excuse to not be perfect here. So then I'm going to do the next row, and it's the same exact thing I'm going to do. I'm just going to do the opposite of what I just did. So I'm going to start by going over and under all the way to the other side. This is a great fill stitch. It works up very quickly and it fills up an area nicely. It also fills up, it doesn't need to just be a square that you're working with or a rectangle. It could fill a shape. If you wanted to do a background of lots of leaves, this would be a great stitch for that. It could do circles. It is very versatile and fills up an area quickly. So if you need a stitch to fill up a big space, this is a great stitch to use. So I'm going to keep working this both sides, and then I'm going to do this part. So when you're done both the vertical and the horizontal lines, you're going to just tie off your thread in the same exact way. I've run this thread through my last few stitches, and I do tie a knot when I'm doing a woven thread or a woven stitch. So just a little knot to make sure that everything's there. So you can see when you look at the back of my work, the majority of the work is not on the back of the hoop. When you flip it over, that's where your work is. And I wanted to show you two different ways. So this way I kept it's more of a rectangle than a square. I kept the lines pretty lined up together. This one, it might look a little wonkier, but that's on purpose. I purposefully extended some of these lines going horizontally. I pushed some of them together so it didn't have as much of a feeling like it was just a straight woven stitch. So it's more uneven, and I wanted that. Again, we're doing like the background of a field or a garden, and so you want it to have a more organic feel to it. So that is the woven filling stitch, and now I'm going to show you another fill stitch that we can use to fill in some of these areas. So let's draw two more squares or rectangles. They can be the same shape, they can be narrower. What if I try and this one I'm going to do more of a rectangle shape, and I'm going to make it a little narrower. And then I think I'll do the same thing over here, only I'll extend it this way a little bit more. That's the fun thing about a project like this. You can sort of decide what shapes you want where. And with a pencil like this, you know that you can wipe away your marks very easily. So have fun with just placing these shapes where you feel like they're going to work. So for this stitch, you don't need a tapestry needle. I'm just using a milliner's needle. It's not a woven stitch, it's more of a laid filling stitch, and I'll show you what that means. And I'm going to use the size 3 Eleganza pearl cotton. And I'm just going to use all one color for the main stitches that you're going to see. And then I'm going to go through again with an accent color. So I'm just going to thread my needle. Okay. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put down the vertical stitches first. Again, these are all going to be worked on top of the fabric, and we're working this first foundation set of stitches in the same way that we did the woven filling stitch. And you can see as I come down to the edge, I'm going to adjust my drawing a little bit, and I'm just going to come very close to the back of the hoop here. You can feel with your needle where the edge of the hoop is, and I went just to that edge because I want to extend this as far as possible. Okay. And again, these can be close together, they can be a little further apart. What you're creating is a series of vertical and horizontal lines. So you get to decide the spacing for these lines. Okay, so I think I might do 5 or 6 lines. Now, I don't normally recommend working with a length of thread this long because it is more likely that you're going to get knots just because you're pulling a long length of thread through the fabric. But for a stitch like this, I like to not have to worry about stopping and starting and threading a needle. So I just suffer through the knots as I get these stitches down. All right, so let's see what 5 looks like, and then we'll decide if we're gonna put another row of stitches on. I think I'm gonna add 6, and I'm gonna go just a little beyond this line. See, there's my knot. Okay, so I actually decided to do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches. Now with this one, because I'm not weaving it, I don't feel the need to start in the middle because I'm going to be able to judge my stitches just starting at one end or the other. And I kind of work sideways as I do this just to see my stitches. I use an embroidery hoop stand a lot when I work, but for these stitches, because my hoop is moving around so much and I'm weaving things and going back and forth, I rarely put it in a hoop stand, just for ease of use so I don't drive myself crazy taking the hoop in and out of the stand. Okay, so I might make these, yeah, I think these are going to be about the same distance apart as my woven filling stitch. And I'm keeping the lines kind of lined up. Again, this does not need to be perfect because we are going to be adding stitches over it. It's the layer that is a background. So any little mistakes or errors that catch your eye will not be noticeable to probably yourself or others because you're going to be filling it with lots of good stuff. So I'm going to finish doing these rows and then I'll show you the next step for this stitch. Okay, so there are my stitches, my foundation rows. I just am going to adjust this one a little bit. You can probably hear the cardinal outside my window. I think he's angry with me because I need to fill up his feeder. Okay, so you're going to tie this one off the same exact way that you tied the others. And since I have thread that I'm not using, I run it through a lot of the stitches. If I had a shorter length of thread, I wouldn't do this many. But because I have it, I'm going to use it. And I'm going to pick a different thread for the next accent bit of this stitch. Okay, so it kind of has the same appearance. When you just quickly look at it, it just looks like a woven stitch. However, when you look closer, you can see these rows are they're not movable because they're stitched in, but they're not nearly as movable as this. So if I did this, you can see I'm moving these stitches. Nothing is going anywhere because it's all woven. So we are going to remedy that. I'm going to take a length of, this is Appleton's Cruel Wool, and I absolutely love this color. It's color 253. It's like it's not quite a lime green, but it's like a chartreuse, it's one of my favorite color greens. It's like a green yellow mix. When I'm threading my needle with a thread that is wispier like this, I like to fold my thread over the needle and then I'm threading the fold, and it just makes it a lot easier than trying to thread this end with all the little loose bits of thread that are hanging on it. So I knot the end of my thread, and now I'm going to go through this. I have to admit is a time-consuming stitch because we are going to go through now and add a little stitch over every bar, every intersection of the lines here. You can either add one stitch, you could do an X to make like a little cross stitch. I'm going to try just doing one stitch first, and then I could always go back through and add a stitch that goes this way. Like I'll see how I like it and if I feel like it needs something else. So I'm just going to go through and add a little stitch like this to all of these intersections. Okay, so there it is with just one stitch, and I think I'm actually going to leave it at that because when I look at it, I feel like it's highlighted the intersections enough, and I don't need the other like a cross stitch to go over each one. So I'm going to do the same thing here, and I think I might do one or two more maybe in this area, the same exact stitch, just somewhere around here. Remember this, we're working on like an abstract idea of a pumpkin patch. So picture this is your field. We're going to be filling it up with these woven stitches, this laid stitch, and then we're going to be adding in some detailed stitches with the color of our background fabric so that it looks full, but it's not going to be taking away from the things that we're going to add on top of this. So I'm going to keep working on my background, and then when I have a few more sections of this done, we're going to come back together and I'm going to add some probably lazy daisies to some of the open areas. So you can see here, I have my 2 sections of woven filling stitch that you already saw. I added a second one here. And you can see with this stitch, what's really cool is that I was able to like make a cutout this way and kind of continue, which I'm going to do with some of the other stitches that I'm going to show you, continue over this way to break it up a little bit. And then we worked on the trellis stitch. You saw this one, which I did in one color, or no, I actually did this in 2 colors. I did the little crossovers in a second color. And then this one, if it looks more uneven to you, that's because that's how I wanted it to be. I didn't want it to be quite as even as this one, so I made my rows slightly like curved. I did some of these stitches close together, and then I did far apart, and like I scattered them because I wanted it, again, remember I keep saying we're working on what a field would look like, and a field wouldn't be perfectly lined up and everything. So those are the 2 stitches that we just learned. And next, I had mentioned that I was going to use some lazy daisies. That will come. The next stitch that I'm going to show you is the cloud filling stitch. Okay, so for this stitch, I'm going to use 2 different colors to mark out the lines. I'm only doing this because I do need to be a little bit more careful with the placement of some of these marks that I'm going to make. So let's see, I'm going to start right about here, and I'm just going to draw 4 vertical lines, or I'm sorry, horizontal lines. Now these lines are going to, I'm not going to see them. I'm going to brush them away when I'm done. I don't need these particular lines as I'm stitching, but I do need the next part, which are little marks. So I'm going to use pink to show you. So I'm just making a set of evenly marked lines over that row of lines that I just made. And then I'm going to skip a row and jump down to this row. And I'm going to make sure that I make the same marks that are going to line up in the same spots just below. Normally I don't mark out stitches, but for a stitch like this, you do want to be more precise than some of the other stitches. Okay, so on these 2 rows, I'm going to make a series of lines that are slightly off from where my original lines were. So you can see they're alternating. I'm going back and forth. Okay. And now you see this tiny little stub of a pencil I'm using. That's how much I love these things. Okay. It's also great when they get to that length to use them for travel, to take them traveling. Okay, so I have 2 colors. Both of these are the Eleganza Pearl Cotton. I have a size 3 and a size 5. The sizes don't particularly matter. I'm just more focused on the colors of this stitch right now. And so I'm going to cut a length of thread, and I'm just using a milliner's needle for this. I think you'd be fine either using a milliner's needle or a tapestry needle. So I'm going to thread my needle, and then these little marks that we made, I'm just going over each of these marks with a little stitch. Just a tiny little like straight stitch. And so I'm going to just fill up this whole section with these little stitches, and then I will show you the next part of the stitch when I finish this. Okay, so there are my little marks, and you can see already those white lines that I had drawn on, because my hand is going back and forth over them. They're already disappearing, which is perfectly fine because I don't really need them anymore. These were the more important lines. So I came to the edge of my end of my thread, and I'm just going to do the same exact way of ending that we've been doing all along. Just wind it under a few stitches and then trim the ends. So now I'm going to take an alternate color, and again, this is personal choice. You could use both the same color. I think it's kind of cool to see it in two different colors, but you could absolutely just do one solid color with this. You could also, another option is to use a variegated thread, because then you're getting a lot of different colors throughout the piece. I might actually do one with a variegated thread to show you what that would look like with minimal effort, because you're just using one thread. So now we're going to come up just right at the end of one of these stitches. So I'm coming up to the left, and I'm going to go under it. And again, you could use a tapestry needle at this point. I'm using my milliner's needle, but we are weaving this, so a tapestry needle would be less likely to stab your threads, but I'm going to live on the wild side right now. And then you're going to go right below. So we're going down, and we're going to go under this stitch, pull our thread through, and then we're going to go up and take our thread through. You're keeping a nice tension on this. I'm not pulling so tight that it's making my stitches shift where they're at. I'm just like gently pulling it through and letting it hang out there. And so I'm just going to keep going all the way back and forth. Till I get to the end of the row. And then when I get to my final stitch, I'm going to pull it through, but I'm also going to take my needle and thread down through the fabric at this point. And I have my first row of stitches. Now my second row is going to start to the right of this stitch in the third row that we had made. And if it's easier, well, no, it's actually better to do it this way. So now I'm going to go back the other way. So I'm taking my first stitch through, and now I'm going up through this stitch. And then down through this one. And again, keeping my tension just a very gentle tension. It doesn't need to be super tight, but you don't want it super loose either. So you'll be able to gauge it as you stitch. And I'm going to go back all the way to the other end. So this second row that we had done of the little, oops, I missed one. Okay, so if you miss one, it's easy enough. You're just gonna back it out and go back down. That's what happens when I stitch and talk sometimes. So what I was saying is this second row of stitches now has 2 rows of thread running through it, which gives it a cool woven effect. And again, I used a long length of thread, and I got it twisted when I started talking, which I don't always do, but when I am doing woven stitches, I tend to use longer threads just to minimize the chance that I'll have to like stop and start my stitches, just because it's easier to not have to worry about that. I'd rather deal with a few knots than have to figure out when I'm stitching, like how to manage the thread. Kind of like when you let your bobbin thread run out on a machine when you're sewing something and you're kicking yourself for not having an extra bobbin of thread sitting alongside your machine to add. It's that feeling. And I'm back to the end of this row. And I'm going to end it the same way. When I finish this stitch, I'm just going to take it down through the fabric. And then I'm going to come back up right here and start again. Actually, I said that and then went to time lapse my stitches and realized I misspoke. You're going to bring I don't want to mess you up. You're going to bring your thread back up again because we're on this edge and we want to go back and forth. If I had brought it up here, it would have messed up, like I'd be going backwards instead of forwards with my stitches. So we're going to just start it like we started our very first row. And this will make sense when you're actually stitching it. You'll see what I was talking about. So now we're back on track with our filling stitch. And I'm not even going to time lapse it now because we're working through this at a nice clip. As I'm stitching this, I'm also looking ahead in my fabric and thinking, where do I want another little section of this? I am going to pull out one of my variegated threads, so I need to look through my threads because I want to show you what it'll look like to work it with just one thread that's variegated, because I really liked that idea once I said something about it. So these filling stitches are great because they do work up fairly quickly-ish. I say that even though I feel like the lattice stitch always does take a decent amount of time to go through, and if you've done it already when I was doing mine, you know all these tiny little threads, it does take an amount of time to do that, but look how cool that looks. So that's the cloud filling stitch. So as I'm looking at my piece and I'm trying not to put 2 of the same types of stitches next to each other, and I'm trying to just do little bits, I might do another one of these, like a small patch just right down here, or maybe I might have it run rectangular and do my dashes and everything this way. So you can see what it looks like using a variegated thread. I used this one. It was an Eleganza size 5 pearl cotton, and I did it at a different angle. So I did it this way rather than this way, just for some variety on this hoop, because I want lots to be going on this first layer that we're working on. So the next fill stitch that we're going to use is the herringbone stitch. And for this one, I have 2 parallel lines. Now, this is a great stitch that could be worked in lines like this, or if I had a curved line, I could fill that as well. And so I'm not drawing a big box. I'm just filling this little area up here that needs something. So I'm going to bring my needle up on the edge of this, and you'll notice my stitches, this is a great stitch for an uneven start, so they're not one on top of the other. This one is over here a little bit. So I'm bringing my thread all the way through. Now up here on the top line, I'm just taking my needle through the fabric and pulling it all the way through. So you can see this is what we have. And now I'm going to take it down here, and I'm just crisscrossing, going back and forth, taking my thread through that little bit of fabric again and pulling all the way through. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to do the same thing. So you're just alternating top and bottom. You decide the length of your stitches, how close or far apart you want them. Have fun playing around with this stitch, because you can really change the look of it by going over further or staying closer. It doesn't have to be a super precise stitch, which is why it's fun to use in a project like this. So you can decide beforehand, I want my stitches more even. And even if it would help you to do little marks on your lines like we did with the cloud filling stitch, by all means go for that. If you're okay with it being a little bit more random like mine is, then have fun with that too. And I'm using this variegated thread again for this one, just because I really like this color. It reminds me of fall, which this is a fall hoop. So I like to incorporate colors that remind me of each season. And it's just making really cool patterned lines. So as I'm working on this hoop, I'm looking ahead at my empty spaces and thinking what I can work up where. That's the fun thing about doing the background as a layer of its own. You're just filling in. You're not worrying about any stitches that are going to overlap on top of it yet. You are just stitching a background base layer. And I'm getting to the end. And you can see the fabric in my hoop it's getting like a little wonky. That happens when you embroider. So the whole time I'm stitching, I'm either loosening my fabric or tightening it as I go, depending on what I need. Some stitches need the fabric to be a little looser in there. Let's see. I think I'm gonna end it here. Yeah, well, let's see. Maybe I can squeeze one more in here. And I think I'm just going to end it by bringing it down right through the fabric. So there is the herringbone stitch. Okay, so our next fill stitch, I'm going to work in this little box down here. It's a little crooked, but I can fix that with my stitches. And the first thing I need to do is to make a foundation of woven stitches. So this stitch is called the plaid filling stitch. And when you first look at it, it looks slightly complicated. It just looks like it has a lot going on. It's not complicated to work up. I do have to think a little bit as I'm doing this one. And I'm gonna make sure that all of my lines are about, I do want space in between my lines. So I'm gonna make it look more like these boxes rather than like close together like here. And I want them to be even as well. And again, I'm using my nice long embroidery thread, which means that I'm getting little knots for myself. But I've already decided that's okay, right? To deal with the knots. Yes, I think that's what I decided. Oh boy. Okay, phew, there we go. This thread just wants to twist as I'm pulling it through. I think I might need to dangle it to let it, let my needle untwist. Okay, here we go. So this is the boring part. I think I'm gonna time lapse this while I make my woven rows of stitches. Okay, so here is my woven stitches, and I went one further over here so you can see that white line, so just ignore that. Now I like to look at this as I'm filling in little boxes. So we're going to be couching over these, which we're going to do the regular couching stitch later. I figured why not start with this one first and then go to the simple couching. So I'm going to start with some long stitches, 2 per box, and I'm using a different color thread, and that will make more sense when I say 2 per box after I do this part. So there's one, and then I'm going to do a second one next to it. Okay, so there's 2 lines. And now I'm going to make 2 more in the opposite direction, going right over these. And there we go. Okay, so that little box now has been filled in by my 2 stitches vertically and 2 stitches horizontally. Now I'm going to skip a box and I'm going to do the same thing here. You can see where it gets the name plaid, the plaid filling stitch from, because we're creating what looks like a plaid pattern. And then we're going to go back over those. Just like this. And using the contrasting thread color, makes it look like there's a lot going on. So I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to skip a box, work here, skip a box, work here, and then we'll come back for this row. Okay, so here's my first row of stitches. It's looking really cool. Now when I move on to the row right below, I'm going to ignore the boxes that I already have some stitching in, and I'm going to start and do the same exact thing in the boxes that are unstitched. And I think after I do this one, I'm going to have to rethread my needle. But we're going to just continue this way. To finish the rest of these rows. So you see it's alternating. So we're going to do the same thing here, same thing here. Okay, so how cool does this look? It looks like there's so much going on and we're not finished yet. So I'm going to use a third color. This is the cotton Redder's mat. So it's slightly thicker than the other two threads that I've used in this. But we have a few more things that we can do. So I'm just going to come back, and all the little lines that don't have any stitching on them yet, and you can play around with this in your own project. I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to do tiny little stitches. And I'm skipping a line, going over here. Wait, is that right? Yes. I'm just kind of coming up with my own little pattern, going over some of these stitches right now. 1, 2, okay. Let's see. Actually, I want to go over this one too. Well, you know, do I want to go over every one, or do I want to leave some? See, this is the part where I'm working through this just the same way that you would and trying to decide like how I want this to look. So I think I'm going to go over all of these. Yes. Let's see. See, this is what I mean. You have to like, this one does take a little thinking through to see what sort of pattern you want to create. And as I'm looking at it, I might go back and go over these, I think. Yep, that's what I'm going to do because I want more of this green color on here. So I'm going to do all of these little lines here. And I'll go back here. So I just want every little line to have something on it for this. I mean, I'm using a thicker thread. So if you were using a thinner thread, you could even do double lines over where I'm doing the single stitch. But because I'm using a thicker thread, that would look kind of silly. So I'm not going to do that. Okay, so there's one row, and now I'm going to go down here. And I don't have many lines this way that don't have anything on them. So then I'm going to go down to this one. Add a little stitch on here. And I'm going to do the same exact thing that I did up top. Add my little stitches. So yeah, play around with this stitch, but you can see that it really makes a very cool fill stitch, especially if you're using, like I'm using all the same color greens on this, but combining them looks really neat. So play with the colors, play with the pattern that you use for this stitch. You might have more rows than I have, like you might be doing a bigger area, which would look really cool. And you know, any of these stitches, If you didn't want to have little patches, if you're watching the whole class and then you're going to stitch your thing and you want to do one whole stitch on the whole background, that would look really cool too. So just because this is how I'm working mine up doesn't mean that yours has to look exactly the same. That's kind of the beauty about a stitch sampler like this. I'm teaching you the stitches and then you decide how best you want to place them on your project. So there we go. That's the plaid filling stitch. Okay, the next filling stitch I'm working right here. This is called the burden stitch and it's also a couching stitch. So I am going to have long strands of thread on these lines. And this is why it's a great filling stitch, because I can just choose an area that needs a little something and I can draw my lines. So 2 of my lines are going to be the same length and 1 is going to be a little off, which is okay. I like the idea of being able to do that throughout this background. Now I'm going to start on my middle row and I'm going to just work the same color on this one, and I think somewhere else I'm going to do an alternate color pattern, like I might do it down this or down here. So I am going to do a series of stitches, and couching is when you're taking something over your stitches. So my one thread is going over my other threads, just like that. I'm going to space these all about the same width apart, all down this one strand of thread. Now, because we've got a lot of woven stuff going on, I'm meeting up with stitches that are above, but that's actually going to look okay for this stitch, I think, because, well, you'll see why. It's going to just start blending together. I'm going to show you the simplest form of couching when we get to our second layer of threads. But for right now, I'm just going to finish working these stitches all the way across this line. Okay, so just one single line like this is just, simple couching. But what we're going to do to make it look a little bit more complex, I'm going to go to the row above, and I am going to work a line of stitches that meet up with this row, but they don't cross over. So they're meeting up with the second row, but it's not crossing over these stitches. That little thread is, okay. And I'm going to put my next stitch like right in between the 2 stitches on the bottom line. So it's going to start fitting together like a little puzzle almost, weaving itself together nicely. Even though there's no actual weaving going on in this stitch, it's considered a laid stitch because you're laying threads over another thread. But it has the look that there's a lot going on. And this is also a stitch where you can alternate thread colors and have fun with it. You can also fill shapes in with this stitch. So like if I had a shape, like a leaf shape I was filling in, or you can do that with this stitch because it's very versatile. So I came to the end of this one, and now I'm going to fill in this row of stitches the same exact way. I'm just bringing my stitches over this third, and they're going right in between the previous row's stitches. So that is the burden stitch. I'm going to finish this up and we're going to move on to the next fill stitch. Okay, so here I finished up my burden stitch. I'm going to move on to another fill stitch. As you are looking at this, you don't want huge chunks of space. So I'm looking at filling in, like I had a big, the next stitch is going to go here. I had a big chunk of space here. I have a big chunk of space here. These little bits of space are okay. Something like this, I'm going to want to put a little bit of something in there. So little bits of space are okay because there's going to be another stitch that I'm going to teach you to fill in little areas. But you do want the majority of this covered in fill stitches. So take a minute to pause and look at what we have and look at where you're going. Do you have a stitch that you really like? Like I really like how this one looks, and I definitely want to squeeze in the cloud filling stitch somewhere else. I know I did it here, but I think maybe a little portion of it I might do up here. I really like how the herringbone stitch looks, and I might come through and do it right in here. I think that's actually what I'm definitely going to do. So take a moment to just look at it as we're nearing, like we're filling up this space, and look and see, what do you have an area that feels heavy? Do you have an area that feels like I know I have this color here, here, and here. I feel like I need it somewhere over here, and so I'm going to be using it with this next stitch. So try and balance out your colors. If you have a thicker thread that you used just in one spot, maybe find another spot over here to like use a thicker thread so that things are balancing out and your eye isn't focused on one particular area when you look at your hoop. You want it to start to feel like it's cohesively blending together. That's our ultimate goal as we create this first layer of our project. So the next stitch I'm going to work here, and I just drew lines. I never normally draw lines with this stitch, but because I want to make sure that I'm filling in an area carefully, I did put in some lines. So this is the chain stitch. Now you might not normally think of the chain stitch as a fill stitch, but worked closely together, it fills in an area nicely. So I'm going to begin with just a very small, oops, you couldn't see that, a very small anchor stitch, which is just a straight stitch. Now my next stitch, I'm bringing my needle up, and I'm going to go under this little anchor stitch that I just made. And then I'm taking my needle and thread back down into the same hole that I came out of. And there's my first little chain. It almost looks like a lazy daisy. So now my next one, I'm bringing my needle and thread up about a stitch length away because I'm trying to keep them uniform. And now I'm going to go under this stitch. So I'm just taking my needle and thread under both little pieces of the stitch, just like that. And then I'm going to pull through and do the same exact thing. I'm going to go down in the same hole that I came up in. And now I'm going to do the same exact thing. So I'm bringing my needle up, going under my previous stitch to create the next link to this little chain. So do your best to keep your stitches even as you work through this. And I'm going to work all the way to the bottom, and then I'll show you how we end this stitch and start a new row. So I drew those lines thinking that each line was going to have a row of stitches on it, but I might need to make them a little bit closer together. I'm not sure if I'm going to use my lines now that I have them, because I do want it to look more like a fill stitch. So, although maybe I should, so it doesn't look too dense. We do want it to feel like there's some airiness in it. See, these are all the thoughts that go through my head as I am stitching a hoop like this. Okay, so I just ended it by taking my needle through all the way to the back of the fabric. And now I'm going to come up here, and I am actually going to use the lines because all of these have air. They have room to breathe. You can see the background fabric through them. So if I were to put these chain stitches like right up tight next to each other, I feel like it wouldn't look as uniform as the rest does. And I do want it to have that same feel since I'm using it as a fill stitch. So again, I make my small little anchor stitch and I take my needle and thread under that, pull through, and I'm going to do the same exact thing. So my next stitch is just going to go under that stitch right here. So I'm going to finish up the rest of these lines. If your lines become so faint, you can see that as I'm like, you can still see them because I'm looking in my video recording and I can see it better than I can actually see it in person. So you can always feel free to, if you need your lines, just redraw them back on. That's not a problem at all. So I'm going to keep working on this and I'll come back when this portion is finished stitching. Okay, so where did we leave off? I was finishing up my chain stitch. And then from there, I did what I told you that you should do. I looked at the empty spaces around and I decided to fill up larger portions of them. So I added the herringbone stitch in here and I kind of made it like not exactly a straight line. I wanted it to swerve a little bit more. I did the cloud filling stitch here, but I did it, you can see it looks different than here because I did my little, I want to say like foundation stitches further apart, and I only did 2 rows of, or no, I did 3 rows rather than the 4 that we did. So you can see just by changing little things, I used just 1 color rather than 2 colors. It looks like a different stitch and I could stretch it out a little bit or I could condense it. And then I did the plaid filling stitch here, which you can see looks a lot different than here where we did it before. I used a different thread. I used just 1 thread color rather than 3 thread colors over here. So there really is so much variety that you can do with these fill stitches. Now I have one final stitch to show you, and that is the seed stitch. And that's going to be the final stitch on this first layer of the pumpkin patch that we're working on. So this is a super, super easy stitch, but you're going to see how this one stitch is going to bring everything together and make it feel really cohesive. It's going to make things gel. Now I do want to leave a few spots where I'm not going to do the seed stitch because we're going to work on that on the second layer. So I'm looking at little areas like right here, little areas that need to be filled in with something. And I'm going to think about the threads that I use. I want to make sure that I have that when I look at my colors of the hoop that I have stuff everywhere. And I think I'm actually looking at this. I want this color green up at the top because I don't really have much brightness up there, and I feel like I do have this randomly throughout. So we're going to work on the seed stitch right up here. And picture, I mean, we're working on a botanical sort of naturey hoop right now. So picture just scattered seeds, and that's what you're doing with this stitch. You're making tiny little stitches that can go in all directions. So the angle of the stitch does not matter. In fact, I think it looks better when they're not all in the same direction. And I'm just making tiny little stitches. It's going to take a little bit to fill in this area. But as you're stitching it, you can decide how full do you want it to look. Like, do you want there to be lots of blank space in between the stitches? and you can go put one layer of stitches down and then go back and look at it and think, does it need a little bit more? Do I need to fill in anything else to make it look like the whole hoop is blending together well? You could come back with a second colored thread if you wanted. So I'm just going to keep working on this. I think for now, I'm just using this one colored thread up in this top section of the hoop. And we'll look at that together, and then I'll decide where else I want to put it on my hoop. So here is my seed stitch. I started scattering it up here, and it almost, doesn't it remind you when it's on a rounded area like this of like the sesame seeds on a bun or something? I'm going to keep working this because I think I'm keeping the same color all throughout the hoop. I'm just going to go, and you can see that I'm working into these stitches. That's the cool thing with woven stitches. You have open areas around here. Work the seed stitch in that, and all that will do is make it feel more together. It can only help the look of your hoop. So I'm going to keep working that. When I'm finished with that, we are going to come back and work on the second layer of this hoop.